So I'm going to be covering a topic that I am familiar with. I think the Punic Wars might be the first videos I uploaded on this channel. But they were from Oversimplified. So I believe those were the first videos I posted. And now I'm gonna be recovering this many years. I was like, this channel's been around since what, 2024? So yeah, or was it late 2023? Yeah, no, it was 2023, yeah. So, yeah, like almost like 3 years later, I'm gonna be revisiting the first Punic War. This time with my favorite YouTuber, Kings and Generals. And, I'm really looking forward to getting a more in-depth look at the battles, because Oversimplified explains kind of like, the main overall political thing in a very oversimplified manner. Kings and Generals goes into the actual battles, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than I actually really want to get into this. So if you want to watch the original video by Kings and Generals, the link is down in the description down below. And if you enjoy my channel and you want to help me out in any way, shape, or form, feel free to please like, comment, subscribe, and maybe consider becoming a YouTube or Patreon member. It would really help me out a lot. It's only for $1 a month and you get early access to stuff. So with that said, and without any further ado, let's do.
The Latin poet Virgil composed his epic, the Aeneid, between 30 and 19 BC. In the poem...
Yeah, it's funny, because, like, with the founding of Rome, is that it's tied to mythology, like, the fall of the Trojan War, Aeneas, the son of Aphrodite, or Venus, or rather, aka, it was one of the survivors of Troy, and then he ended up going and founding a kingdom that would eventually bring forth, the Romans. And that was kind of commissioned by Augustus to kind of tie in Rome with mythology and even the Caesar line, because Caesar claimed to be the son of or like the descendant of Aphrodite, something like that. And yeah, so like the Romans tied themselves to the mythology of the Trojans. And uh I believe Dido, it was Dido or Dido, who was a queen who Aeneas had, a connection and relationship with, is kind of was known for cursing Aeneas, and that I think she was supposed to be like a forebearer of Carthage. And kind of as an explanation to the hostilities between Rome and Carthage. So obviously a lot of this mythology. And Augustus kind of commissioned it to tie in mythology with actual Roman history. That's kind of the whole point with what he wanted from the Aeneas. And I often heard that Aeneas, as Virgil wrote him, was actually meant to kind of critique Augustus in some ways. So, it's very interesting, the background of this thing. Before I graduated with my bachelor's in English, I was one of my last semester of college before I graduated was taking it was an epic course, and we read several epics. We read the Odyssey and we read the Aeneid in that course. So about a year ago. Well, yeah, over a year ago, because I graduated like last May 2025. So yeah, by the time this comes out, it'll be like what, July. So yeah, it's been a while. So and yeah, there's some stuff like that going on. So yeah, like Aeneas supposed to kind of be Augustus and whatnot. So it's really cool how the Romans kind of tied in the mythology of it all.
The hero Aeneas escapes the destruction of Troy and eventually lands in Italy, where his descendants are destined to found the city of Rome. Along the way, he falls in love with Dido, the queen of Carthage, but eventually abandons her to fulfill his destiny. A heartbroken Dido stabs herself upon a funeral.
Yeah, I remember that. She has the most extra death ever. She like stabs herself and then sets herself on fire or something like that. Swearing eternal enmity or some crap like that. I don't know. It's just so extra. I almost laugh at it. I'm so sorry.
Pyre, invoking a curse for the centuries to come. Then as for you, O Tyrians, plague this stock and the whole race to come with hatred, and send this service to my ashes. Let there be no love or treaties between our peoples. This is how Virgil retrospectively imagined the origins of the rivalry between Rome and Carthage, an enmity which unleashed the 3 Punic Wars. In this video, we will cover the major events of the First Punic War, the young Roman Republic's first true military trial outside the peninsula. Previously, this series on the First Punic War was only available exclusively for our YouTube members and patrons. You can join their ranks to watch more than 200 exclusive videos covering every era of history, including 21 episodes on the Second Punic War. All links in the description and pinned comment.
You want receipts? Sarah Hernandez has them.
Purchase all our favorite travels.
As a big Total War Rome 2 player, I like the music I recognize from it all, and that Kings and Generals. I mean, Kings and Generals has always used Total War backgrounds for the animations and, you know, the music, but I like that I recognize it now that I'm a Total War. I mean, I only play Total War Rome 2, but if I ever get bored with the game, I'll probably move on to other Total Wars, so my journey's only begun, but yeah.
Between 280 and 275 BC, the Roman Republic fought.
Yeah, I've covered the Pyrrhus of Epirus series. I was obsessed with Pyrrhus like over a year ago, like 2024 through 2025. I was really obsessed with him. I read Plutarch's entire telling of the life of Pyrrhus, and we covered. It was actually the first Kings and Generals series I ever covered. Like, I was watching the Napoleon series, right? By Epic History. That was kind of where a lot of my channel started to grow early, and then after that I was really like I was planning on what am I gonna watch after Napoleon. I think Pyrrhus is the one that I put forward. I chose to watch it on my own. No one even asked me to. Like but it was the first Kings and Generals because I was really obsessed. And I think that's a big part because I've mentioned with you guys I'm obsessed with Hellenism, right? I'm obsessed with Greek, the Hellenistic age, you know, from the time of Alexander all the way through the Diadochi until the fall of the successor states. That's my favorite era in history. The Greeks are my favorite people to learn about. Greek history, Greek culture, Hellenism is my favorite, guys. I'm obsessed. You know, and even my channel's full of it. Like, I'm wearing this purple headband meant to be like a diadem that the Hellenistic monarchs you see in coins kind of wear. Even my shirt, like, you kind of see Greek inspired with the laurel stuff and the helmet that's kind of like Spartan-esque. Like, can you guys see the thing? So I'm like very inspired by the Hellenistic stuff. Like, wait, Hellenistic diadems. Yeah, the head tie. That's actually what I've been trying to do, because if you see all the coins, they have this thing tied around their head. I'm like trying to imitate it, as you guys can see. That's actually why I started having this little uniform on my channel, my shirt and my little thing. Antiochus the Great. Yeah, so you can see they like tied this around. It was called a diadem, and they would tie it around their heads like a headband, and that would be a sign of that they were monarchs. So point is, as you guys can tell, I'm a big nerd. So it brings back memories. It kind of Pyrrhus kind of being the first on this channel. Of my Kings and Generals series, and boy was I baffled by Pyrrhus of Epirus. This dude just could not focus on one thing. He kept jumping around and fighting everybody. In a tactical sense, brilliant. In a strategic sense, lacking. But I remember reading his the thing is that the Romans and the Carthaginians were both enemies of Pyrrhus, and they even worked together. I believe when Pyrrhus first defeated the Romans, he sent peace envoys, and the Romans were very close to accepting. At times, the Romans decided, "No, we'll keep fighting," but they actually did at times consider making peace with Pyrrhus. And another time, I believe it was the Carthaginians who actually talked the Romans into not making peace with Pyrrhus. So this was kind of a beginning of they had a common enemy in one guy. So that was kind of a good early account of the Romans and the Carthaginians kind of talking to one another. But after Pyrrhus went, it kind of set the stage for the Carthaginians and Romans, you know, because after the defeat of Pyrrhus, the Romans kind of started to make a name for themselves in the world. And even like the Egyptians, the Ptolemies took notice of the Romans pretty early on, so a pretty big setting point.
A victorious war against Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, in a bid for supremacy over southern Italy and its Greek-founded cities. During that conflict, Rome had been allied with the Carthaginians, whom they referred to as Punici or Punics due to their Phoenician origins. Carthage had a strong presence in Sicily, a prized possession of their empire, including much of northern Africa, southern Spain, Corsica and Sardinia. And a decade later, Sicily would be the main battlefield upon which these erstwhile allies would do battle. The first tiles of the vast mosaic of the First Punic War were laid back in 288 BC. After the death of Agathocles, tyrant of Syracuse, his unemployed mercenaries of Italian Campanian origin decided to seize for themselves the city of Messana, modern-day Messina, on the doorstep to mainland Italy. In their brutal occupation, they expelled or massacred all male inhabitants, divided amongst themselves the women and children as slaves, and branded themselves as Mamertines, the sons of Mars, the god of war. Their reign of terror dragged on until 264 BC, when the new ruler of Syracuse, King Hieron, armed and trained a citizens' militia and moved against them. Hieron clashed with the Mamertines at the Battle of the Longinus River, inflicting a heavy defeat upon them. The Mamertines retreated to Messana and were put under siege. Fearing destruction, the Mamertines realized they needed allies, but who? One party among them advocated for an alliance with the Carthaginians, whilst another faction preferred to involve Rome instead.
This is where Mayor Vass lives.
Yeah, the stage is set, right?
Soon, a request for help from the Mamertines reached the Roman Senate. Part of the assembly favored the intervention. Helping the Mamertines would have prevented Carthage from occupying Messana, a position from which they could have threatened mainland Italy. The debate was inconclusive, but the popular vote tipped the balance in favor of the alliance. Following this, a 20,000-strong army under Consul Appius Claudius was dispatched to Sicily. The main expedition was preceded by an army legate, also called Claudius, who was shocked to discover that Messana was teeming with Carthaginian troops and ships. Indeed, the Mamertines had eventually dispatched requests for help to both Rome and Carthage, and the Punics had got there first. Claudius, the legate, resolved the situation by speaking to the Carthaginian admiral Hanno, inviting him to a
Why do the Carthaginians only have like 3 names? Hannibal, Hasdrubal, Hanno, like they really like the Han, don't they? I just noticed that. Like, I mean, I've noticed that in the past, but I've never like brought it up with you guys. And I'm just like, they really like that name Han, huh? Just every name, like the Carthaginians. It must be confusing when like all the population has the exact same name, huh? But oh boy.
Conference. But it was a trap. Claudius took Hanno prisoner and offered to free him only if the admiral ceded control of Messana's fortified citadel.
Wow, that's kind of a low blow, Rome.
The Mamertines immediately switched allegiances, electing the Romans as their new saviors. This did not go down well with the Carthaginians.
Yeah, like bad.
A second force, led by a general also called Hanno, promptly switched sides
See
as
what
well,
I mean? Hanno, so many Hannos.
and forged an alliance with King Hieron of Syracuse. To recap, Legate Claudius held Admiral Hanno hostage in the citadel, while the Mamertines in Messana now braced themselves for a double-pronged attack, with General Hanno laying siege from the north and Hieron from the south. Armies of that age sure knew how to pull off a Mexican standoff, or whatever this mess of a siege was. The situation was saved by the arrival of Consul Claudius with the bulk of the Roman army. What they lacked in fantasy when picking names, the Romans more than compensated for in heavy infantry tactics. After a failed mediation attempt, the Romans quickly defeated the Syracusans, then turned north to face Hanno. The Carthaginians were also beaten in the field, and the Romans raided and ravaged the countryside before moving towards Syracuse. Despite all this, Appius Claudius's siege of Syracuse did not result in an easy victory. It dragged on into 263 BC, with King Hieron having to do little but turtle behind his walls, while Malaria did a splendid job of keeping the Roman soldiers in check. Eventually, the annual term of Appius Claudius's consulship ended, and he was relieved by the new consuls, Ottocilius Crassus and Maximus Messala, who brought along fresh reinforcements, 16,000 footmen and 1,200 cavalry. The Roman army retreated back towards Messana, followed closely by the Syracusans. Hieron, however, noted that whenever opposing scouting parties met in the field, they not only did not fight one another, but actively fraternized with each other.
A talent was a unit of measurement roughly equivalent to Hieron's tribute, therefore. Oh, wow.
Feeling that the tide of public sympathies was shifting towards the Romans, the King of Syracuse switched sides once again, becoming a staunch ally of the Republic and agreeing to pay a tribute of 200 talents. With their rear secured by their new friend, Crassus and Messala launched a successful campaign against.
That's incredibly smart of Syracuse, by the way, because yeah, the Romans are the rising stars of the age now, actually, we did cover a series by the YouTuber known as Invicta last year about the Punic Syracusan wars between Carthage and Syracuse. You can feel free to check that out. I did a reaction to that by Invicta, all 6 parts. I think it was 6 parts, but that's kind of leaving the stalemate with Carthage and Syracuse splitting the island, but soon Rome is about to just take it all.
The Carthaginians were defeated in the field at the Battle of Himera, a display of Roman prowess which prompted 67 towns and cities, previously under Punic control, to ally themselves with Rome.
Why do we keep repeating the same?
My goodness, look at how fast the tide is turning.
The initial Roman campaign had been a success, with the Carthaginians now driven back towards the western half of Sicily and Rome firmly in control of the northeast. Carthage, however, was resolved to put up a strenuous fight.
Okay, Hannibal Gisco bore no relation to the latter, of course, because there's like a billion Hannibals. More famous, Hannibal Barca, my favorite military commander of all time. Hannibal meaning Ball is gracious. Yep. Was a very common name amongst Carthaginians as it paid homage to one of their main deities. In general, in Punic societies, the family name was written after the first name. That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense with the name stuff, because I was like, why is there like a trillion Hannos and Hannibals? like they really like this name, but that makes sense in a cultural sense. Okay, I get it now.
In 262 BC, command of land operations was entrusted to Hannibal Gisco. Unlike the Romans, the Carthaginian army relied heavily on mercenaries and allied troops, rather than conscripted or volunteer citizens. Hence, following the defeat at Himera, Gisco needed time to raise a new army, recruiting mercenaries from northern Africa, Spain, Gaul, and Liguria.
It's true. I've mentioned that I'm playing Total War Rome 2, and I'm kind of slowly getting. I've mainly only played as like Hellenistic kingdoms due to the Pikes, because pikes are my favorite weapon and the phalanx is my favorite formation. But I've been kind of looking a bit into Carthage, and yeah, Carthage has a cool advantage when it comes to mercenary recruitment. Like, just the base Carthaginian armies that you can have, they're good, but like for later game, they can kind of lack. But the Carthaginians can hire so many great mercenaries that it's almost at times just better to have a mercenary army when you're playing as Carthage. And that's a big thing. The Carthaginians, yeah, they relied heavily on mercenaries. And, you know, instead of a native man pool, like the Romans, for instance. So I'll say it's definitely a very interesting thing.
A force of 50,000 troops was assembled in the city of Agrigentum, near Sicily's southern coast, and Gisco stocked up on weapons, supplies, and provisions. His tactic was to draw the Roman army into a set-piece battle, which he could wage with the advantage of an easily defensible position and overwhelming forces. The Roman Senate took the bait, and dispatched an expeditionary force under the two consuls of the year, Lucius Postumius and Quintus Mamilius. Expecting an easy victory, the consuls only brought 2 legions under their command. After setting camp, they thinned out their already scant forces by sending out large foraging parties. Gisco immediately realized his tactical advantage and ordered a sortie to wipe out the Roman encampment. His hopes were dashed by the remaining sentinels, who offered fierce resistance and died to the last man. The bitter fight allowed for the foragers to return to camp and fight back the Carthaginian sortie. In the following days, Gisco displayed more caution, limiting his actions to harassing the Romans with missile bombardment. Meanwhile, the legionnaires expanded their quarters by building 2 separate camps, connected by a double line of parallel trenches and ramparts. One line, closer to Agrigentum, protected the camp from Carthaginian sorties. The other guarded the Romans against any attack from the rear. Consuls Postumius and Mamilius also set up an efficient logistics system by ensuring constant resupply from the nearby town of Abessus, north of Agrigentum. 5 months passed without decisive breakthroughs on either side. The supplies of the besieged party, however, were dwindling, and Gisco sent a request for help. The Carthaginian Senate dispatched General Hanno with a new army, which included 6,000 Numidian cavalrymen and 50 elephants. Hanno set up his headquarters in Heraclea, from which he proceeded to take Abessus by surprise. The Romans now had been cut off from their supply lines, and were squashed between Hanno's hammer and Gisco's anvil. The besiegers were now besieged, and soon famine and diseases started to take their toll. Postumius and Mamilius realized that their position was untenable and ordered their soldiers to prepare for battle. They would attempt a breakthrough against Hanno's forces. General Hanno laid out his soldiers over 2 lines, the heavy infantry at the front and the reserves and elephants in the second line. The formidable Numidian cavalry guarded the wings. Contemporary sources do not provide details on the Roman order of battle, but presumably the consuls in charge adopted the 3-line formation typical of the Manipular legions. Also, the cavalry protected the Roman flanks, which were the first units to engage the enemy. This is when the Romans realized the superiority of the Numidian light cavalry. Fast, agile, and skilled at—
Yep, the Numidian cavalry, bro. Carthage is arguably Carthage's greatest weapon. Because the Numidian cavalry, as we would learn, especially in the Second Punic War, are what gave so many victories to the Carthaginians, and Hannibal used them to their max potential. Again, the Romans, in terms of infantry, I think are already leagues above most of their enemies. The only way to truly beat the Romans is through cavalry superiority. Like, if it's just a pure infantry-based battle, the Romans are coming out on top. But if you can manage to win the cavalry battles, you can easily envelop and attack, so that's the only way to beat the Romans at this point, you know? You need better cavalry, and the Numidians are just that great. Yeah.
javelin throwing, the Numidians were able to pick off the Roman horsemen from a distance before charging and driving them off the battlefield.
Yep, but probably them leaving isn't a good idea because just leaving the the infantry favors the Romans.
The Carthaginian infantry, on the other hand, was no match for the Romans.
Yep.
Postumius and Mamilius's maniples clashed head-on with Hanno's first line, pushing them back towards the second line. At this point, a second, smaller Roman force managed to surprise the Punic formation from the rear, sowing panic amongst the elephants, who trampled Hanno's own troops. 30 pachyderms died.
Yeah, I remember when we watched Invicta's video about the war elephant was actually kind of new in the grand scheme of Carthaginian military weaponry. They were still new at this point. So their success rate was very 50-50. And I can attest, I use war elephants when I'm playing Total War Rome 2. If I can war elephants are my favorite war animal, so if I can ever use them in games, I always try to. And but there are times, I remember one time where I moved my elephants way too close to the front lines alongside my phalanx, and the enemy skirmishers and missile units targeted my elephants, and then my elephants lost control and proceeded to trample upon my phalanxes that were already engaged with the enemy. It was funny. So I had this front line of phalanxes all lined up to take the enemy, and the elephant was like zigzagging in and out, attacking my phalanxes, like one row, the next row. And he just kept trampling on them, and I was there like, no! I had to like quickly send out all my cavalry units to like envelop and attack from the sides, because I was like, I need to salvage this. I need to use my cavalry to win the flanks. Because at this rate, I'm about to lose. I managed to win, but holy crap did I lose a lot of guys due to my awful elephant placement. That's when I learned my lesson and never moved my elephants anywhere near my phalanxes again, so. Yeah, I just used them as a last resort to plug in gaps and stuff.
In the carnage, but the Romans managed to capture 11 of them. As per Hanno, he was forced to order a hasty retreat back to Heraclea to save what remained of his army. The consuls now turned to face the second Carthaginian force, Gisco's garrison within Agrigentum. But the crafty commander was a skilled escape artist, it seems. Taking advantage of a dark and cold winter night, he had his soldiers file in silence out of Agrigentum. Carrying bags stuffed with straw, the Carthaginians filled the deep trenches of the Roman siege works, scaled the ramparts, and eventually passed through the sentries unobserved.
Wow.
In the early hours of the morning, the Romans
Wow, dang.
discovered they had been tricked and quite possibly bamboozled. Some units of legionnaires gave chase, but they were soon recalled for a more pressing matter at hand, the storming of Agrigentum. The city was effectively defenseless, and the inhabitants surrendered immediately, but they had to withstand the horrific treatment reserved to places taken by storm. The Roman soldiers plundered the riches of Agrigentum and seized 25,000 prisoners to be sold into slavery.
John McKinney with
The Battle of Agrigentum was the first major engagement of the first phase of the First Punic War, fought entirely on land. Its consequences were momentous. As both Hanno's and Gisco's armies retreated to the western end of Sicily, more and more towns and cities on the island pledged allegiance to Rome. The Carthaginian fleet remained active around the island, from its bases of operations on the west coast. The threat of incursions from Carthage's navy thus prompted several coastal cities to defect back to the Carthaginians. Still, theoretically, the war aims of the Roman Republic had been achieved. They had saved the Mamertines from destruction, had secured a new powerful ally in Syracuse, and had driven the Carthaginians away from Messana. and therefore mainland Italy. But it was at this stage that the Roman Senate understood the occasion they had chanced upon, the opportunity to evict Carthage from the central Mediterranean for good, and to maintain lasting control of the rich and fertile island of Sicily.
Yep.
But to achieve total victory, Rome had to change strategies and theatre of operations. In 261 and 260 BC, Rome had the advantage on land while Carthage dominated the sea. These tactical advantages represented a strategic stalemate for both contenders. The Romans could field numerous, well-equipped, skillfully led legions to mount an invasion of Carthage itself, but had no fleet to take them there. On the other hand, the Carthaginians boasted a powerful navy, manned by experienced sailors, but lacked the skilled troops and leadership needed to invade Italy. The question was, who would fill their gaps first? As it turns out, the Romans were not entirely inexperienced in sailing. A class of magistrates, the Duumviri Navellis, had even been instituted to oversee repairs of Rome's fleet of triremes, used mainly for coastal and anti-piracy operations. These ships, fitted with 3 rows of oars, were nonetheless too small and too few to take on Carthage's mighty fleet of quinqueremes, which boasted 5 orders of oars. Clearly, the Republic had to develop their own quinqueremes, but how could they acquire the necessary skill? A gift of Neptune, or a simple stroke of luck?
Yeah, this is hilarious. So, just as it happens, a random Carthaginian ship lands, and the Romans are like, cool, let's just copy the design, and they have their own, and just like that, the Romans have their own navy. The Carthaginians' only advantage was that naval superiority, and we've seen what naval superiority can do. Think of Admiral Yi, and how he managed to defeat the Japanese, or think of or think of like Britain, when the UK when Britannia ruled the waves, and then not even the best armies like Napoleon could conquer them ever. Like, naval superiority is OP, and with that alone, the Carthaginians probably could have won the war, but they lost that. And the moment they lost that, the war was basically lost itself. Because the Romans, man, this goes to show you the most frightening thing about the Romans. They adapt. Like, if an enemy has an advantage over them, they quickly adapt and try to find ways to counter the enemy. And again, if they're, you know, like you think with Pyrrhus of Epirus, mentioned earlier, Pyrrhus of Epirus used his elephants to crush the Romans several times. The Romans, after 3 battles, had already basically figured out a way to deal with Pyrrhus's elephants, so where Pyrrhus couldn't use them to win anymore. And here, like, the Carthaginians have naval superiority. They proceed to now find a way to get their own navy. So the Romans just had high adaptability, and that paid dividends for them.
Assisted the Romans when a Carthaginian vessel ran ashore on the coast of Calabria. Roman engineers used the shipwreck as a model for their own quinqueremes. According to Polybius, in barely 60 days, Rome and its allies on the coasts of southern Italy had constructed 100 quinqueremes and 20 triremes.
Again, terrifying how fast they managed to raise armies and fleets so quickly. It's actually terrifying. Just the Roman manpower that they could field.
Such a fleet required 12,000 marine soldiers, and more importantly, 30,000 trained rowers to be operational. This was achieved by training the rowers even before the ships had been completed. The magistrates in charge had wooden scaffolds erected on beaches, which replicated the internal structure of the vessels. Roman and Italic trainee oarsmen sat on the scaffolds and practiced the art of rowing in unison, following the commands of the calustes.
Insane.
Larissa Roy wants to be Los Angeles.
Again, terrifying.
However, what the Romans could not learn in the short time available were the complicated maneuvers required to ram an enemy ship, the main naval tactic of the time. What the Romans did learn, however, was how to brace a ship for impact, therefore absorbing and limiting the impact of a ramming attack. Roman engineers developed a new weapon based on this principle, the corvus,
Yep.
a mobile bridge fitted with a beak-shaped metal spike. Once a Roman quinquereme was flanked or rammed by the enemy, the corvus would be lowered onto the other vessel, thus connecting the two ships. And by using a rotating contraption which affixed the corvus to the main mast, this mobile bridge could be lowered in any direction.
I know, crazy, right? And then the Romans, because they have infantry superiority, would just turn any sea battle into basically a land battle and just have their superior infantry just board and slaughter everyone. Like, crazy, huh? Just the advantages that the Romans kept getting. It is amazing. The Roman war machine is something to marvel at, especially early Rome, you know?
Of marines would then march across the corvus, engaging enemy sailors in close
Yeah, early Rome was something to marvel at, dude.
quarter combat. Thanks to the
Dude.
corvus, the Romans effectively took what made their soldiers so deadly on land and made it applicable in naval combat.
Genius. Absolutely genius.
Rome's new fleet and tactics would soon be tested in 260 BC. The fleet was put under the command of consul Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, who immediately set sail towards Messana with a squadron of 17 ships. On his way, Scipio decided to make a detour and occupy the Lipari Islands, home to a small Carthaginian garrison. The consul reaped an easy victory, but news of this Roman assault soon reached General Hannibal Gisco, headquartered in the Carthaginian stronghold of Panormus. Gisco immediately dispatched 20 ships under Admiral Bude, who, sailing at night, arrived undetected and blockaded the port of Lipari. The inexperienced Roman sailors lost their nerve and scurried to mainland Sicily. A terrorized and impotent Scipio could do nothing but surrender. Command of the Roman fleet was thus transferred to another consul, Gaius Duilius, who was clearly a better naval commander. Having learned that the Carthaginians had been raiding the peninsula of Mille, he set sail towards them. The Carthaginian fleet, led by Hannibal Gisco himself, numbered 130 quinqueremes, which on parchment should have easily disposed of the 100 hastily built ships of those Roman upstarts. Bursting with confidence, they fell upon Duilius's vessels without even taking formation. 30 Carthaginian ships rowed ahead, aiming to ram an equal number of Roman ships head-on, rostrum to rostrum. The Italic oarsmen held fast and absorbed the impact, as they had been trained to do. Then Duilius sprung his trap. The corvi fell upon the Carthaginian timbers, grappling their bridges with 30 iron raven beaks.
Yep, and just like that, the Carthaginians lost their naval superior. That was so quick, holy crap, dude.
The Roman marines immediately lined up on the mobile bridges and launched their attack against the unprepared Carthaginian sailors. 20 of Carthage's ships took a different approach and charged sideways, port to starboard, aiming to break the Roman oars. But they were in for another surprise when the monstrous corvi rotated 90 degrees and plunged their beaks equally efficiently.
Oh my gosh, just insane. Insane.
In some cases, the enemy ships were so close that many Romans didn't even walk the mobile bridge, but simply leapt over the parapet onto their enemy's ships. The Carthaginian fleet had lost 50 of its quinqueremes, locked in a deadly embrace with their supposedly inferior enemy. Gisco ordered for the remaining 80 ships to steer off Mille and then headed to Sardinia to regroup. Emboldened by the victory, Roman land forces in Sicily marched over Segesta, very close to the Carthaginian holdings. The Romans then embarked on another maritime expedition, this time targeting the other two large islands controlled by Carthage, Sardinia and Corsica. The fleet was now led by one of the consuls for the year 259 BC, Lucius Cornelius Scipio. He was the brother of Gnaeus, who had been eventually defeated at Lipari. More importantly, he was the grandfather of Publius Cornelius Scipio, called Africanus, who would take a pivotal role in the Second Punic War.
Yep.
Scipio sailed
Yeah,
first.
that Scipio bloodline it's cool to see actually an earlier version of it, but as we know, the Scipio bloodline would be instrumental in defeating Carthage in the Second Punic War.
Towards Olbia, the Carthaginian capital in Sardinia, but the city's defences proved too strong, and the Roman navy was repelled. The Romans were more successful in taking Aleria, the main Carthaginian garrison on the island of Corsica. Scipio returned to Rome at the end of the year for a well-deserved triumph, and handed over admiralship to Consul Gaius Sulpicius. In 258 BC, Sulpicius chased Hannibal Gisco's fleet all the way to southern Sardinia, and their two fleets clashed near Sulcis Tyrennica. The Romans managed to surround Gisco's fleet while moored, sinking most of its vessels. It was one defeat too many for the Carthaginian general. His own men mutinied against his command, arrested him, and eventually crucified him, a frequent fate for losing Carthaginian commanders.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I remember Oversimplified explained the military doctrine of the Carthaginians and the Romans. The Roman generals, you know, like the consuls had a time limit, right? Like, what, about a year or two? So they needed to, if they wanted to make their mark in history, they needed to be quick. That's why the Romans were so aggressive and go-getters, because, like, we don't have time. I need to do this now. The Carthaginians, by comparison, were more cautious, because apparently all failure would be met with crucifixion. So, yeah, you could see why stuff like that would play a part. Yeah, but also probably killing any military talent you have like that is probably not good in the long run. But, yep.
To achieve these victories in Corsica and Sardinia, Rome had dispersed its forces, and the Carthaginian forces in Sicily would take advantage. The new commander at Panomus, Hamilcar, seized the day when the Romans partially withdrew from their recent conquest of Segesta. He chased the departing legions and ambushed them in their camp at Himera, slaying 4,000 enemies. He then moved westwards, falling upon Eryx, allied
Yeah,
to
this is Hannibal's dad, right? Who actually was incredibly effective in the Sicily front. Yeah, you can see the mighty Barca bloodline, right? It is amazing how Carthage, like, I know they were mainly a Carthage was mainly what's the word? Economic empire. Their whole thing was trade, and so by comparison, like, they weren't good at war as compared to the Romans, who are a warlike people, to put it nicely. So, you know, it's stuff like that. It's why Carthage wasn't the best, even though they had the potential to be good. I felt like Carthage never fully reached that potential. But the Barca family was the one exception. They were like the anomalies of Carthage, because they were great in the military front, you know? So yeah.
the Romans, destroying the city and imprisoning the inhabitants in the nearby fortress of Drepanum. A Roman army under Consul Aulus Atilius sought retribution, aiming straight at Panumus. However, Hamilcar had reinforced the city's defences, which discouraged Atilius from even attempting a siege. Atilius attempted to draw out Hamilcar for a pitched battle, but the Carthaginians did not take the bait. Atilius then decided to seize minor yet important enemy centres. First, his legions marched over Hepana, and then they took Mitistraton after a brief siege. As per custom, the city was sacked and burnt to the ground, and its citizens were massacred or sold into slavery. The consul's next target was Caramina on the southern coast of Sicily. While on their march to the south, Atilius' troops had to walk through a narrow mountain pass, where a Carthaginian contingent ambushed them. A small Roman detachment, consisting of 2 or 3 maniples led by a tribune, held off the enemy while Atilius led the bulk of the column to safety. The self-immolation of the unknown tribune and his troops was not in vain, as the consul added Caramina to his string of conquests. The following year, 257 BC, saw the election of another consul from the gens Attilia, Gaius Attilius Regulus. The new consul had just landed in Tyndaris when he dove straight into the action. From the coast of Tyndaris, Regulus observed that a Carthaginian squadron was sailing past without maintaining any specific formation, making it vulnerable prey. Attilius gave the order to attack, and before the bulk of his fleet could be readied, he set sail at the head of a squadron of 10 quinqueremes. The Carthaginian commanders realized that most Roman vessels had not left port yet and steered towards the small incoming squadron. The Carthaginians outmaneuvered the Roman ships, surrounding them and destroying them in ramming attacks. Only the consul's ship managed to escape the encirclement.
Yeah, a bit too eager there. I mean, granted, like, they are emboldened now, but, like, they still, you know, a bit too eager there from the Romans.
Its oarsmen frantically rowing towards the coast. Only at this stage did the remainder of Attilius's fleet finally leave port and come to the rescue. The Roman ships arranged themselves in a line and challenged the enemy head-on, using the well-rehearsed Corvus tactics. 8 Carthaginian ships were sunk, 10 were captured, and an unknown number escaped to safety on the Lipari Islands. Despite some teething problems, the Roman Republic had been able to adapt, evolve, and quickly master the art of naval warfare. In several...
Yeah, holy crap, did they not waste time in gaining that naval superiority? Literally taking away Carthage's one advantage that could have probably helped them in the entire war.
Significant engagements, the Roman fleet was on par with the Carthaginians, arguably the finest shipbuilders and sailors of the Western Mediterranean. Rome's Senate and its military leaders now felt confident enough to dare the unthinkable, build an even larger fleet, and mount an expedition of epic proportions that would take the fight straight into the Carthaginian homeland. According to ancient historian Polybius, by the summer of 256 BC, the Romans had assembled a fleet of 330 quinqueremes in the port of Messana, as well as an unspecified number of vessels for the transport of troops, animals, and supplies. Each of the quinqueremes was manned by 300 rowers and 120 marines, which puts total Roman manpower at least 138,600.
My gosh, just... the Roman manpower is insane, bro. I've often said that the Romans activated the infinite manpower cheat when they play games, because holy crap, just the people they keep spawning. Infinite manpower, bro.
The fleet then sailed southwards, doubled the Cape of Paginus, and then veered westwards, heading to Cape Ecnomus. Polybius states that the Roman land forces happened to be just in that neighbourhood. Presumably, one or more legions were due to embark in preparation for invasion. Unbeknownst to the Romans, the Carthaginians headquartered at Panomus became aware of the plan and rallied an even larger fleet, numbering 350 vessels, manned by 150,000 sailors, which is roughly the entire population of modern Tallahassee, Florida. Their combined force left...
Oh man, they got all of Florida fighting now. Wow. What a unique way to just say that.
Stopped at Lilybaeum and then dropped anchor at Heraclea Minoa. From their anchorage at Cape Ecnomus, the Romans prepared themselves for the crossing towards northern Africa. The consuls in charge, Marcus Attilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius, knew that their ships were slower and less maneuverable than their enemies. Thus, they conceived a formation to provide maximum protection for both the vessels and the cargo. They stationed their own enormous hexareme galleys at the very front, each to be followed by one squadron, following a diagonal line. This gave the formation the appearance of a large wedge. The consuls then placed a third squadron at the base of the wedge, thus closing a triangle. This squadron was also in charge of towing the transport ships, vital for the invasion's success. Finally, a fourth squadron of vessels, described by Polybius as triarii, closed the formation, arranged in a line behind the transports. Back in Heraclea, The Carthaginians were steadying themselves for a major battle in open waters. Their leaders, Generals Hamilcar and Hanno, addressed their forces, stressing the importance of a victory. If they emerged triumphant, they could aim at retaking Sicily. If they lost, they were bound to fight for the very existence of their homeland. With their spirits galvanized, the Carthaginians sailed eastwards, ready to quash the Roman invasion in its inception. When Hamilcar and Hanno came into view of the Roman fleet, they gave dispositions for their squadrons to attempt an encirclement maneuver. 3/4 of their vessels arranged themselves in a single line, their bows facing the Romans. Their southernmost squadron, led by Hanno, extended to the open sea, ready to pivot in a pincer movement. The northernmost squadron, under Hamilcar, was slanted at an angle towards the coast, ready to close the pincer from the north. Regulus and Manlius took notice of the incoming enemies, and of how thin and extended their main line of battle was. Aiming to break the center of their formation, the consuls ordered for their 2 squadrons to row forward at speed. The Carthaginian ships immediately retreated westwards, prompting the enthusiastic Romans to charge even faster.
Oh boy.
However, this Carthaginian withdrawal was part of Hamilcar's plan to extend and eventually break the Roman formation. A plan which worked perfectly when the Roman rear squadrons and the transports were left isolated at the rear. When the Carthaginian center had drawn off the consuls' squadrons far enough, Hamilcar released a signal from his ship. The Carthaginian galleys all turned simultaneously and charged back at their pursuers. A colossal naval melee ensued as each faction fought how they knew best. The Carthaginians outmaneuvered and outflanked the Roman ships, ramming into their sides with their rostra before quickly disengaging.
My gosh, the naval movements and formations are just super cool to look at. And Hamilcar, bro, this is Hamilcar Barca, right? I could be completely wrong. I know there's a billion Hamilcars, but I'm assuming this is Barca. If I'm wrong, I've been wrong since his introduction. I apologize, but you should forgive me because the Carthaginians only have 4 names. But either way, this is such a playing on the Romans' eagerness is a good move though. I can't remember if the Romans somehow pull off the win still, but either way, a pretty strong start to the Carthaginians, you know what I mean?
And taking on the next target. On the other hand, the Romans made good use of their corvus, the lethal mobile bridge fitted with an iron beak. Once a dropping corvus hooked a Carthaginian ship, the Roman marines swiftly crossed the bridge, disposing of the enemy crew. Regulus and Manlius also actively stormed enemy ships and incited their men to fight with more vigor. At the same time, Hanno's squadron had swung northwards as intended and was facing the 4th Roman squadron, or Triarii, gaining the upper hand. Further north, the Carthaginian squadron closer to the coast had pivoted southwards, falling upon the 3rd Roman squadron. To increase their speed, the latter vessels let go of the ropes towing the transport ships, which remained stranded amidst the 3 separate engagements raging around them.
Yeah, I know, just 3 separate engagements all happening simultaneously.
The main fight pitched the consuls against Hamilcar and was initially evenly matched, but the Romans had an advantage. Their fleet had been conceived as a landing expedition, therefore they fielded more heavy infantry compared to the Carthaginians, which gave them the edge in close-quarter fights. Eventually, Regulus...
Yeah, the moment it becomes a close-quarter fight, it's essentially over for the Carthaginians. That's why you don't want the Romans to close the gap, you know?
And Manlius's forces had the upper hand, and Hamilcar ordered his ships to disengage and sail westwards. Manlius's squadron then rounded up several enemy ships as prizes, whilst Regulus ordered for his vessels to row east, going to the aid of the Triarii and the transport ships. Regulus's squadron veered north, thus attacking Hanno's squadron from the rear. The morale of the Triarii was boosted by the sight of the consular ship and went on the attack.
Oh my gosh.
Hanno was now crushed between 2 lines of ships and narrowly escaped to the open sea. This left only 1 Carthaginian squadron on the waters of Ecnomus. This division was closer to the coast, which had engaged the Roman 3rd Squadron, pushing it closer and closer to the shoreline. The Carthaginians, however, did not attempt decisive ramming action, as they had observed the effectiveness of the corvée at close ranges. This allowed Regulus and Manlius to close in on the enemy from 2 separate directions, thus forming a perfect encirclement. Only a handful of
Yeah, the way that this battle definitely started, like them falling for like a Carthaginian ploy, and then immediately like again, it just the problem is that Corvus, like if the Romans can find a way to you know board your ship, it's basically done. It seems like the Carthaginians are not learning that lesson. Then again, I don't know how you would counter the Corvus, but it seems like the Carthaginians just haven't like even attempted to try, so yeah.
Carthaginian ships managed to escape the 3-pronged attack, while 50 vessels and their crews fell into the hands of the Romans. The largest naval battle in antiquity had come to an end with a clear Roman victory. In total, 680 warships had been deployed by both sides, manned by almost 300,000 men. Rome had captured a total of 64 galleys.
Again, the Romans, who had before did not have any like naval you know experience, at least comparable to the Carthaginians, not only engaging in the largest sea battle of antiquity, but also winning, is insane. This is why Rome became the powerhouse that it was, because these guys just kept evolving, adapting, and getting better. They would literally take what their enemy did and then just make it better.
Sunk more than 30, thus eliminating almost 1/3 of Hamilcar and Hanno's fleet. The consuls had lost 24 ships sunk and none captured. The bulk of the invasion force was intact, and there would be no obstacles from Ecnomus to North Africa. The invading force under Regulus and Manlius swiftly sailed across the Mediterranean, landing at the Hermaean promontory on the northeastern end of the Bay of Carthage. From there, the Roman legions proceeded south towards the city of Aspis, which they took after a short siege. Meanwhile, what remained of the Carthaginian fleet had returned to their home city to warn the local ruling Senate. As the Romans were expected to attack immediately, the capital's defences were strengthened. But Regulus and Manlius had other plans. In the days following the conquest of Aspis, their soldiers systematically plundered its rich and fertile lands. The Romans drove vast herds of cattle into their camp, ransacked farms and palaces before setting them on fire, and finally abducted 20,000 inhabitants of the countryside to be sold into slavery. This wealth accumulation may have prompted the Roman Senate to issue an unexpected order. Lucius Manlius would return immediately to Rome with the war booty. Regulus would be left in charge of operations in the Carthaginian territory with 40 ships, 500 horsemen, and 15,000 soldiers. Shortly after Manlius's departure, General Hamilcar returned to his homeland with 500 cavalry and 5,000 foot. In consultation with the other 2 generals, Hasdrubal and Bosta, he resolved to crush the Roman threat. But Regulus maintained the initiative. From Aspis, he marched his soldiers some 100 kilometers to the east and prepared to attack the city of Addis, the antechamber to Carthage and its bay. The Romans surrounded Addis with their siege works and raided the countryside for supplies. Seeing an opportunity to target their foraging parties, the 3 Carthaginian generals deployed their own army near the besieged city. Numerically, their forces were roughly equal to the Romans. But the locals could boast 2 advantages: highly skilled light cavalry and a detachment of war elephants. Both assets would have seriously harmed the Romans if deployed on open flat terrain.
Yep.
Unfortunately, Hamilcar, Hasdrubal, and Bosta decided to concentrate their force on the top of a rocky hill.
Oh my gosh.
This tactical blunder
Yeah, I remember this. Like, it goes to show you the Carthaginians did have like advantages. I just feel like they never fully utilized those advantages to their max potential. it's not until later that a random, Spartan or Greek general is like, hey, idiots, use flat ground for your cavalry, and, just like, ugh. Yeah. The Carthaginians, man, like, ugh.
Not lost on Regulus, who attacked the hill before the elephants and cavalry could leave their camp. In the early hours of the day, 2 columns left the Roman camp, approaching the Carthaginian hill from opposing sides. When the defenders took notice, the Romans were already marching up the hill, too late to unleash the horses and elephants. The camp's defense was left to mercenary infantry, who staged a gallant sortie, charging downhill at one of the Roman columns. The legionnaires were forced into a hasty retreat, and the Carthaginian mercenaries chased them all the way to the plain. But in doing so, they overstretched their lines. The second Roman column took advantage and attacked the mercenaries from the rear, routing them for good. Both Roman columns then reprised their ascent of the hill, closing in on the Carthaginian camp. Behind the palisades, the trio of generals realized that their men had suffered a breakdown in morale and that resistance would have been futile. By the time Regulus reached the top of the hills, his adversaries had already begun to disengage. The elephants and the cavalry cautiously descended onto the level ground and then retreated at speed, followed by the infantry. Regulus's legionnaires gave chase, but soon desisted, preferring to indulge in a more pleasant pursuit, plundering booty. The Romans ransacked the Carthaginian camp, dismantled their trenches, and then overran the entire region. Addis and other towns fell quickly. Amongst his conquests, Regulus chose Tunis as his base of operations. This city was a mere 4 hours march away from Carthage, and made for a perfect staging point to storm or besiege the capital. According to Polybius, the consul was anxious to achieve a quick victory. As his year in charge was ending, he feared that his successor might despoil him of his hard-earned glory. Moreover, Carthage itself was on its knees. Besides the recent military defeats, the Carthaginians had endured Numidian incursions from the west. Thousands of terrified inhabitants had left the countryside to seek refuge behind the walls of Carthage. As a result, famine and disease were widespread within the city. For reasons not specified by Polybius, however, the normally aggressive and reckless Regulus did not move on the attack, but rather tabled talks with the Carthaginians, proposing terms for an armistice. The local Senate accepted to parley in the spring of 255 BC, but the conditions proposed by the consul were simply too harsh. Carthage had to acknowledge Rome's supremacy, form an offensive and defensive alliance with the Republic, give up all of its navy, save for one vessel, cede Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, and Lipari, and pay an enormous tribute on top. The Carthaginian Senate rejected these terms.
Yeah, those are some of the most harsh terms ever. Holy crap, like, might as well tell me to chop off my balls while you're at it, Regulus. Like, yeah, I could definitely it. Regulus is trying hard, but it is interesting that despite his eagerness to get things over with, yeah, he's taking, at least trying to use diplomacy. I guess he must figure that, hey, the Carthaginians are so screwed. Like, I'm wrecking them so hard that they probably will just accept any peace at this point. But yeah, I guess the Carthaginians still had a little bit of resolve at this point.
Described by Polybius as so dishonorable and so unworthy of their past history. Carthage resolved to fight, but the willingness to give battle was not enough to secure victory. Thus far, the Carthaginian army had been let down by the poor choices of its generals. The Senate realized this and understood that a new commander was needed to set the right strategy and drive the Romans back into the sea. Unlike the Roman army, which relied mainly on citizen soldiers and Italic allies, the Carthaginian infantry was composed mainly of mercenaries. Sometime in 256 or 255 BC, a Carthaginian recruiting agent had been scouting the Mediterranean, seeking to hire the best mercenary troops in the area. During Carthage's darkest hour, with Roman consul Regulus at the gates, the agent returned with a fresh intake of Greek spears for hire. One of them was a Spartan soldier, Xanthippus, a natural commander with a wealth of experience in infantry tactics and strategy. Xanthippus took an interest in the recent defeats suffered by the Carthaginians, assessed their strengths and weaknesses, and formulated a conclusion. Compared to Rome, the Punic army had a much larger and more skilled cavalry, and they had elephants. To make the most of these advantages, Carthage had to seek to encamp and engage the enemy on flat open terrain. It seems like Xanthippus was particularly adept in the art of stating the obvious, but according to Polybius,
exactly. It's like, idiots, you have the better cavalry, you have elephants, use open terrain to win. It's like I said earlier, you keep trying to have infantry battles with the Romans, who have the best infantry arguably at the age. Not even arguably, I'm pretty sure they just have the best infantry even at this point. So like, stop trying to win the infantry battle. You gotta use, this is why Hannibal was successful, by the way. Hannibal always use his cavalry to envelop, defeat the Roman cavalry. That's the only way you're beating the Romans. You need to win the cavalry battle and then have the cavalry crash upon the flanks. That is the only way you can win. Xanthippus is the only person who has common sense in the Carthaginian camp. He's the only one who figured it out, and it's so obvious. Could you imagine the Carthaginians hearing this? They're like, yeah, you're right. Like, you know what I mean? The Carthaginians, bro. They're like they're such. Boy, the Carthaginians, man. They're so frustrating to learn about.
this simple tactical approach had been lost on the trio of Carthaginian commanders, Hamilcar, Hanno and Bosta. The Carthaginian Senate summoned Xanthippus and asked him to expand on his ideas. The Spartans' sound advice impressed the elites and uplifted the populace's morale. The generals welcomed Xanthippus into their fold and started assembling a new army, ready to take on regulars in the field. The new force that left Carthage's walls consisted of 100 elephants, 4,000 cavalry and 12,000 foot. The infantry was mostly mercenary, but it also included a militia of 5,000 citizens. The army kept to flat terrain during their march, and encamped on the equally level country, somewhere between the river Bagridas and Tunis, the Roman headquarters. The Romans immediately perceived a change in Carthaginian conduct, and were alarmed by the novelty. Nonetheless, the usually aggressive regulars
Yeah, definitely. The Romans are like, oh wow, these idiots are actually learning, huh?
decided to close the distance with the enemy, setting up camp about 10 stadia from the enemy. The morning after, the trio of Carthaginian generals sat at a council of war, discussing possible battle formations. Their deliberations were interrupted by the shouts of the soldiers clamoring for Xanthippus's name and asking to attack immediately. The generals took advantage of the surge in morale, ordered their men to prepare for battle, and then handed over command to the Spartan.
You have to give it, the Spartans are kind of known for their martial prowess, so yeah, it kind of makes sense that, you know, the Spartan would kind of point out military doctrine and kind of figure it out. Even though I know Sparta's past its peak at this point, like, as a major player in the world stage, they at least still have the power of, you know, seeing basic stuff like using your overwhelming cavalry advantage on open terrain, which I don't think requires a military genius to point out, but apparently to the Carthaginians it did. Oh boy, I know I'm like dissing the Carthaginians a lot. I know that war wasn't their strength. They were a naval time power, but in like in an economic sense. I get that, but man, it's like, boy.
Xanthippus acted immediately, issuing his order of battle. The elephants were deployed along a single line at the very front. Behind them, at a small distance, the heavy infantry was laid out in a strong phalanx formation. And at the sides of the elephants, the cavalry guarded the flanks, backed by light infantry. Consul Regulus observed the battle formations and decided to accept the engagement. He marched forward his 15,000 legionnaires and 500 equites, and arranged them as per the Republican tactics of the era. The light infantry, or velites, took up the first line as per Republican custom. Behind them, the maniples were arranged into the three categories of hastati, principes, and triarii. Regulus increased the depth of each line, however, to contrast the momentum of an elephant charge. Finally, the cavalry was split into equal detachments on both sides of the lines. After a tense standoff, Xanthippus gave the order to attack. The elephants advanced towards the velites and hastati, while the cavalry rode out to outflank the entire Roman formation. The Romans did not wait for the elephants to hit their line. Raising a battle cry and banging their pila on their shields, they too charged forward. The Roman cavalry, however, did not stand a chance against the Carthaginian horsemen, who were superior in quantity and quality.
Yep.
The equites on both wings were run over by their foes and were chased off the battlefield. As for the infantry, the maniples on the left wing managed to dodge the impact with the incoming elephants, pressed forward, and smashed against a formation of mercenaries on the Carthaginian right wing. Hundreds of mercenaries were cut down, and the survivors ran back to their camp, pursued by the Romans. The centre and right wing of Regulus's formation were less successful. They bore the brunt of the elephant charge, thrown into confusion by the sheer mass and crushing stampede of the pachyderms. In the words of Polybius, they were knocked down and trampled upon, they perished in heaps upon the field.
My goodness. You know, the Romans actually had found a way to deal with the elephants during the time of Pyrrhus. Their solution was just to keep throwing javelins at the elephants, which would panic them. And that's how they defeated Pyrrhus. That must have been lost on Regulus, or the Romans must have forgotten, because I was thinking like, oh, if they like spam javelins, the elephants could easily be panicked and run back. That's why I was a little bit like, Xanthippus' position of the elephants is unique, because like usually I think elephants are best used in reserves, or like to plug in gaps, like kind of like when the enemy's already engaged, or like you're kind of losing it, you send in the elephant. He started off with just the elephants as the main attacking force, and again, if the Romans had found a way to panic them, that could have easily backfired, as the elephants could have ran back and hit them. But I guess at this point, the Romans did not try to panic the elephants. They straight up tried to brawl with them, which was really really dumb. But yeah, and they lost the cavalry wings, so yeah, very interesting. I've never used elephants. Like when I'm playing Total War Rome 2, I've mentioned I always have my elephants at the back of my infantry, and I use them to plug in gaps. Or like once the enemy armies are fully committed, I use the elephants to swing around and commit flanking maneuvers. Like I never start off my charge with the elephants, because I know that, they can be panicked if the enemy has like missile units. But that's me. I mean, not to pretend that I would do better in real life. It just, I kind of want to talk about Total War Rome 2. So yeah, that's kind of the whole factor, right? Apparently Regulus didn't try to panic the elephants. He tried to straight up fight with them, which was ill-advised on his part.
The increased depth in Regulus's lines allowed the legions to remain unbroken for a short while.
Oh my gosh.
Until the cavalry arrived. After routing the equites,
the
Carthaginian horse returned to outflank and—
Yes, envelopment tactics. That's why Hannibal defeated so many Roman armies. He figured it out. You just need to envelop them, and Xanthippus, the genius he is, also figured that out.
And encircle the principes and triarii, picking them off at will. Crushed from all sides, some Roman soldiers managed to force their way through the lines of elephants. Slaloming through their trunks and massive legs, they emerged exhausted and in loose order to the other side. That's when Xanthippus' second line, the phalanx, marched forward and cut them to pieces.
Yeah, you barely escape that and then immediately get hit with the Greek phalanxes. Well, holy crap.
Xanthippus had achieved a tactical masterpiece. a complete encirclement of the enemy with a force of a similar size. Predictably, 13,000 out of 15,500 legionnaires were massacred on the field.
Holy crap. Oh, this is like the biggest, this is the first W, major W, that the Carthaginians have gained in this war, and it's not because of them, it's because of the random Greek mercenary they hired. This is more Xanthipus' victory. Oh boy, that's kind of embarrassing though, like, yay, we got our first major victory. It wasn't even us though, it was really it was Xanthipus, the random Spartan dude, like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Baghrades. Consul Regulus somehow succeeded in breaking the encirclement and tried to flee towards Tunis with 500 soldiers in tow. But the enemy cavalry was soon upon them, and all of them were captured. Only 2,000 Romans had escaped death or capture, those who had smashed through the mercenary lines on the left wing. Those 2,000 eventually fled to Aspis, on the promontory east of Carthage. As per Xanthipus, he could boast of having lost only 800 men.
Xanthipus, bro. You know, it's time that the MVP award be distributed, and I give the MVP award to Xanthipus.
Despite his triumph, Xanthipus did not stay at the head of Carthage's armies. Fearing the jealousy of the local generals, he soon embarked homewards. The Carthaginians,
I remember that from frickin' Oversimplify. The Carthaginians letting go of that guy was a big L. Like, you know, if it's true that that jealousy is what drove him away, then yeah, the Carthaginians have a great way of shooting themselves in the foot. Like, that's something I always like notice about them, like with Hannibal out there winning great victories, and then they just decide not to help him in any way, shape, or form, or reinforce him. And then here, Xanthipus, proving to give them their most major W, and then letting him essentially leave. The Carthaginians have a great way of like shooting themselves in the foot whenever they start to maybe get an advantage in anything. It's kind of astounding when you really study it. And even then, it's like they should probably take into heart Xanthipus' strategy of using open terrain and cavalry and elephant superiority. But if I remember correctly, they don't take his innovative, common sense strategies to heart. So yeah.
Doomed the fight, willing to wipe out the survivors of Tunis, now entrenched in Aspis. The Punic army besieged the city, but was frustrated by the courageous resistance of the survivors. Meanwhile, the Roman Senate received news of their plight and started building a new fleet to repatriate them. In turn, the Carthaginians learned about the Roman shipbuilding program and launched one of their own, assembling 200 ships quickly. The Carthaginian fleet patrolled the North African coast, waiting for the Romans to show up. The enemy fleet was finally sighted just off Cape Hameum. The Punic squadrons prepared to give battle, but to their surprise, the Roman fleet was huge. It numbered 350 quinqueremes, dispatched from Italy under the command of consuls Marcus Aemilius and Servius Fulvius. This fleet was joined by a further 40 vessels moored at Aspis, which sailed out to join the fight.
Oh my gosh.
The Carthaginian fleet was surrounded and gradually pushed towards the coast. The Roman vessels approached and lowered their iron-beaked corvi, mobile bridges, allowing the infantry to board and neutralize the enemy crew. With these tactics, Aemilius and Fulvius were able to sink 16 vessels and capture 114 ships, adding them to their already enormous fleet. The Roman galleys safely picked up the survivors at Aspis, as well as all their supplies and booty, and sailed off to Sicily. But it seems as though the Roman navy had run out of favor with Neptune, and perhaps also with Aeolus, ruler of the winds. A mighty storm surprised the fleet off Camarina on Sicily's southeastern coast.
Oh my gosh.
All but 80 of the consul's ships were drowned or driven against the rocks, littering the seaboard with wrecked timber and mangled corpses. According to Polybius, no greater catastrophe is to be found in all history as befalling a fleet at one time. The Greek historian blamed the consuls for the tragedy, as they had ignored the warning of experienced pilots, advising against sailing along the southern coast of Sicily. Moreover, they had dared to set sail when the two dangerous constellations, Orion and the Dog Star, were visible. The news of the shipwreck galvanized spirits in Carthage, and the Senate decided to resume operations in Sicily.
Yep. You know what's funny? In the First Punic War, I kid you not, I'm pretty sure natural disasters did the heavy lifting for the Roman casualties more than the Carthaginians did. Like, I'm pretty sure the Romans lost... Because there's going to be several more ship disasters, and I'm pretty sure in total, due to those natural disasters, the Romans must have lost over 100,000 men, and, like, several fleets. Again, maybe the actual MVP should be the weather. You know what? I'm also gonna give the MVP award to Neptune, because, dude, Neptune carried for Carthage. I'm kidding around, but, like, it's true, though. It is true in a sense that the weather probably and the natural disasters are more responsible for the Roman casualties in this war than I think the actual Carthaginians themselves.
The command was entrusted to General Hasdrubal, who rallied an unspecified number of soldiers and 140 elephants.
Dang, these elephants, dude. Holy crap.
The expedition reached the Punic stronghold of Lilybaeum on Sicily's western tip, while Carthage fitted out yet another fleet of 200 ships. Hasdrubal then set out to drill his men and his elephants, preparing them to strike at the Romans on open, flat terrain.
Okay.
Clearly, the teachings of Xanthippus had left a mark.
Hopefully.
Feverish preparations were also taking place in Rome. The Senate of the Republic grieved about the loss of their fleet in the shipwreck, but in the typical Roman fashion, they failed to acknowledge the setback and ordered the construction of 220 new vessels.
This is the greatest insight to the Roman psyche, early Roman psyche ever. They take a major L and they just proceed to build another army. Like, again, the manpower and the resources of Rome is insane. They literally just will not quit. Their resolve is like the greatest of their age. Holy crap.
The new squadrons were ready in 3 months, and in 254 BC, they were entrusted to the new consuls, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio and Aulus Attilius. The fleet sailed to Messana, picking up the survivors of the Camarina shipwreck along the way. Now 300 ships strong, the Romans sailed to Panomus, the strongest Carthaginian possession in Sicily. The legionnaires disembarked close to the city and laid up their siege works, blockading Panomus from 2 different locations. One division concentrated on the district known as the New Town and its fortifications by the sea. Using a massive battering ram, the Romans knocked down the main defensive tower, thus opening a breach. The legionnaires then poured through the battered walls, taking the New Town by storm. The inhabitants of the Old Town were demoralized by this easy victory and surrendered the entire city to Scipio and Attilius. The consuls had easily taken over Panomus and sailed back to Rome for their triumph, leaving a garrison to hold the city. The following summer of 253 BC, new consuls Gnaeus Servilius and Gaius Sempronius launched a second mission to North Africa. Unlike the earlier expedition, Servilius and Sempronius did not even attempt to invade Carthaginian territory. Still, they continued sailing along the shore, launching pillaging raids against coastal towns and the countryside. After one of their incursions, the Roman ships ran aground on shallow waters in the Lesser Syrtis, and could resume their journey only after throwing overboard all their heavy load. Thus, the consuls had to sacrifice most of their loot and sailed back to Sicily with nothing to show for their effort.
What a waste. Oh, that sucks.
But their spell of bad luck was not over. Upon returning towards Rome, a storm took them by surprise in the Tyrrhenian Sea, destroying more than 150 ships.
My gosh, dude.
It appears that nature had succeeded when Carthage couldn't.
Yeah, dude, like, nature is the MVP. They are carrying Carthage so hard because Carthage is not getting anywhere near the major victories to inflict any major, like, loss upon the Romans. Holy crap.
Contrary to all expectations, the Roman navy had mostly prevailed against its Punic rival in the first years of naval warfare, but in the last 2 years of operations at sea, Carthage had lost 130 ships at the Battle of Cape Hermaeum. Rome, on the other hand, had suffered the sinking of 534 vessels due to natural disasters.
Oh my gosh. And the fact that they continue to build ships and win is insane.
To say nothing of the loss of human life. Taking the crew of a quinquereme as a reference, Rome may have lost up to 220,000 oarsmen, sailors and marines, a staggering death toll, in addition to the casualties endured in battle.
And they continue to build ships, by the way, fleets, and they continue to go on and win the war. WTF. Again, the Romans, bro. It's like that meme from South Park, I ain't hear no bell. That's literally the early Rome's entire identity. They will get their butts kicked, but proceed to go on with the fight. Like, they literally can't be stopped. Wow, just wow, dude.
Whilst the Roman Republic had reacted with stubbornness to the first shipwreck, the second disaster dealt a heavy blow to its confidence and finances, to the point that the Senate decided not to launch a new shipbuilding program. Carthage had become master of the seas once again. All that Rome could do was shift their theatre of operations back to Sicily, seeking a decisive land victory to dislodge their enemies from the island finally.
Oh, really? They don't build another fleet? I could have sworn they did. Well, either way, still, though. They still go on to win the war, which is crazy enough.
In 251 BC, the consuls Lucius Caecilius and Gaius Furius crossed the Straits of Messana with 60 ships, the scant remnants of Rome's once mighty fleet. Their legions marched westwards towards the Carthaginian possessions, but their actions uncharacteristically lacked conviction. The defeat of Xanthippus against Regulus at Tunis left a profound impression on the Roman leadership. Knowing that a force of 140 elephants had landed on Sicily, they would think twice before attempting to challenge the forces of Carthage on an open field. The two consuls' campaign yielded some limited results, with the conquest of Himera after a short siege. But they generally kept their troops safe by moving on mountainous terrain, only sporadically braving an approach towards Lilybaeum and Selinus. Even on those occasions, they did not dare stage an attack, fearing an elephant charge. The expedition concluded with the recall of Gaius Furius to mainland Italy, accompanied by half of the consular legions. His colleague, Caecilius, remained on the island, quartering his troops at Panomus. Observing the Romans from Lilybaeum, Carthaginian general Hasdrubal took notice of their reduced numbers and declining morale. This was the time to strike and retake the former Carthaginian capital in Sicily. In the year 251 BC, half of the Roman army under consul Gaius Furius was recalled back to mainland Italy, leaving the other consul, Caecilius, in the city of Panormus, a city which had been wrested from Carthaginian control just 3 years earlier in 254 BC. When the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal learned of this, he saw an opportunity to deal a crippling blow to the Roman legions, and he brought elephants to a spear fight. Hasdrubal moved out of his headquarters in Lilybaeum and set up camp on the border with the territory of Panormus, trying to lure Caecilius into a fight on open terrain. But the crafty consul, wary of the power of elephants on flat territory, did not take the bait and waited within the city walls. Hasdrubal—
Yeah, they're both realizing the power of the flat terrain, right? Again, you gotta give it to the Romans. They quickly learn. Like, they'll take an L, but they'll learn, and they'll be like, okay, no more flat terrain. The elephant is too great. You know? Don't try to fist fight, a sword fight an elephant like Regulus did, you know? So, yeah.
interpreted this as a sign of cowardice and boldly marched closer and closer to Panomus, laying waste to the countryside along the way. Once again, Caecilius resisted the temptation to give battle and waited patiently until the Carthaginians had crossed the Paparetus River. Hasdrubal's troops were now standing between the city walls to the east and the body of water to the west. It was time to strike.
Oh boy.
Detachments of velites, Roman light infantry, sortied out of Panomus, harassing the besiegers and provoking them to attack the city. As Hasdrubal approached the walls with his infantry and the elephants, Caecilius sprung the second part of his trap.
Oh boy.
Further units of velites, hidden inside the moat, darted out of their cover to pour volleys of
the javelins. That's enough to scare the elephants. Oh my gosh, yeah, the Romans, bro, they're learning.
Javelins against the attackers. When the elephants charged too close, the light infantrymen simply jumped back into the moat, where they could collect more missiles from heaps laid out by Panomus's armorers. Caecilius had effectively neutralized the danger posed by elephants by denying them what they needed to succeed, masses of people they could trample to death.
Yep.
Meanwhile, the consul assembled his maniples of heavy infantry by the city gate, opposite the left wing of the Carthaginians. The maniples sallied out of the gate piecemeal, offering support to the velites when and where needed. Frustrated by the situation, the Carthaginian officers in charge of the elephants decided to stage a massive charge to distinguish themselves in the eyes of Hasdrubal. The pachyderms thundered forwards at once, succeeding in routing the skirmishers and the heavy infantry. But as soon as they got too close to the walls, volleys of arrows and pila turned the mighty pachyderms into giant ambling pincushions. The elephants panicked, turned around, and stampeded across the Carthaginian lines, sowing confusion and flattening their own masters. The bulk of Caecilius's maniples were still fresh and rearing for action. He ordered them to charge into battle, running diagonally into the fragmented Carthaginian lines. The Punic infantry was thoroughly beaten and sent into a precipitous flight. Polybius did not record the number of casualties, but the Greek historian reassures us that Caecilius could herd and capture all the elephants and 10 of their riders. News of the victory was a massive morale booster in Rome. Caecilius had proved that the tusked monsters could be easily dealt with, and thus the Senate agreed to finance the construction of a new fleet,
Oh my
200
gosh.
ships strong.
Where are these people coming from? I'm telling you, the Roman manpower, dude. Just like, cool, just crap out a new navy. A new fleet, another one. Just another one, just, oh my gosh, it just never ends.
Vessels carrying supplies and fresh troops landed near the Carthaginian base of Lilybaeum in 250 BC, led by the new consuls Caecilius Regulus and Manlius Vulso. The Romans laid siege to the city, blockading it by land and sea. Their strategy was to evict the enemy and then bring the fight back to North Africa, which had already been invaded without success in 256 BC. The Carthaginians realized what was at stake. Eryx, Lilybaeum and Trepanum were their only possessions left in Sicily, and they were ready to defend them at all costs. Lilybaeum was very well fortified, protected by a garrison of 10,000 soldiers, and guarded by high walls and a deep ditch. Moreover, the approach from the harbour was guarded by lagoons, which rendered navigation difficult. Regulus and Vulso, nonetheless, set up 2 camps to blockade the city, connected by a ditch, stockades and a wooden wall. They then progressively advanced their siege works towards the tower closest to the shore, and proceeded to batter it with rams. The tower fell, and so did the other 6 standing nearby.
Oh my gosh.
The Romans succeeded in damaging or destroying other fortifications almost daily, but the energetic Carthaginian commander, Himilco, was quick in rebuilding them. The Roman efforts were further frustrated by daily and nightly sorties aimed at setting the siege engines on fire. Himilco's successes were almost compromised by some of the mercenary officers in his command. They left Lilybaeum at night and entered the Roman camp, offering to surrender the city. A loyal mercenary leader, Alexon the Achaean, got wind of the plot and reported to Hamilco. The general and Alexon addressed the mercenary troops, inciting them to loyalty with promises of additional payment and favors. When the treasonous officers returned to the city, hoping to incite their troops to switch sides, they were instead met by volleys of stones and arrows. Himilco had secured the allegiance of his soldiers.
That's very good. But can you still hold? I mean, I don't know, man. If you're besieged by both land and sea, the Romans can afford to just take time, right? To starve them out. Like, I don't know how you can come out of this like victorious.
But he still had to feed them.
Yeah.
Luckily for him, Carthage had been preparing a relief convoy of 50 ships and 10,000 troops under General Hannibal. No, not that one. No relation to the Barca family.
Yep.
Hannibal's fleet reached the harbour of Lilybaeum, sails flying in a strong gale. Surprisingly, the Roman fleet did not even attempt to stop it, probably taken by surprise, or fearful of sailing in such a strong wind. The arrival of Hannibal boosted the morale of the citizens and garrison alike, which Hamilcar put to good use by organising a massive sortie. In the early hours of the following morning, he led out his troops, targeting key points in the Roman siege works. But the legionnaires were not taken by surprise this time, and fought obstinately. Soon, fighting spread along the battlefront, degenerating into chaotic hand-to-hand combat. Blazing fires engulfed the Romans' rams and siege engines, but the consul's troops still did not yield, effectively defending their main siege works and causing heavy casualties amongst the Carthaginians. Hamilcar took notice of the unsustainable losses and eventually ordered his trumpeters to sound a retreat.
Dang.
The siege resumed as before, but Hannibal succeeded once again in braving the naval blockade. This time, he left the harbour of Lilybaeum under the Romans' noses, or rostra we should say, and sailed to bring reinforcements to Drepanum. This tough decision left Lilybaeum needing a supply fleet, but luckily help was on its way. Back in Carthage, a nobleman called, guess what, Hannibal the Rhodian,
Oh my god.
offered to...
I'm telling you, why do they only have... like, imagine how confusing it must be when you're just, like, hanging around. It's like, yeah, like, half of the dudes in your family and, like, or named, like, Hannibal, Hanno, Hasdrubal, like, just, like, everyone's named that, like, oh boy. I'd be like, what? I know, like, 20 Hannibals, dude.
Run the blockade with his own private vessel to supply Himilco, and then report back to the Carthaginian Senate. Once more, the Roman ships guarding the harbour were caught napping as the Rhodians swooshed into port. The enraged consuls set up a trap at the exit of the harbour by readying their 10 fastest ships. This time, the Rhodian would surely fall prey to Rome. He didn't. The next morning, the nobleman's vessel sailed out at speed, oarsmen on full power, leaving the Romans baffled for the 4th time. The consuls tried another tactic, building a mole in an area of shallow waters. One night, a Carthaginian ship exiting Lilybaeum got stuck on the mole, and the Romans promptly seized it and manned it with their fastest rowers. When Hannibal the Rhodian returned for another mission, the Romans let him slip in, but their commandeered vessel immediately gave chase as he sailed out. This ship caught up with the Rhodian, and the nobleman prepared to give battle. But the Roman marines boarded his vessel in overwhelming numbers, finally capturing the daring blockade runner.
Dang.
His magnificent ship was also seized.
Yeah, again, the Romans, bro, like, there's so many factors that made Rome, especially early Rome, so terrifying. One, infinite manpower, so it doesn't matter if how many, they can always replace their losses. Number two, adaptability. They adapt so quickly and learn from their enemies and then promptly make countermeasures to defeat their enemies' greatest strengths, and just like so terrifying. And just they won't give up. They never give up. So again, you might be able to outwit the Romans a time or two, but eventually they're gonna catch on and then immediately try to stop you.
And used to chase off or capture other runners daring the blockade. Meanwhile, inside the city walls, Himilco had focused exclusively on strengthening his defenses until the forces of nature came to his aid. Sure enough, a violent windstorm soon erupted, wrecking the wooden towers used by the Romans to protect their siege engines and siege works. A unit of Greek mercenaries sensed an opportunity. Splitting into 3 groups, they hurled lit firebrands upon the Roman works. Flames erupted almost immediately and soon spread due to the strong winds.
Oh my gosh.
Scorched by fire and blinded by the smoke, the legionnaires failed to put out the blaze. The destruction was almost complete, as a single day of bad weather and Greek fire, pun intended, had destroyed weeks of Roman hard work.
My goodness, dude. I'm telling you, maybe Wetter should have the MVP award. Wetter has bailed Carthage out more than anyone.
The consuls gave up on the idea of breaching Lilybaeum's walls and switched tactics. They surrounded the city with a deep ditch and a wooden stockade, erected a wall to protect their own camp, and left the completion of the siege to Saturn, the god of time. When the year turned to 249 BC, the besiegers received 10,000 troops as reinforcements, marching behind the new consul Publius Claudius Pulcher. As soon as he arrived, Claudius announced a surprising change of plans. The bulk of the troops would sail off to attack the city of Drepanum instead. Claudius's fleet, 123 ships strong, departed at midnight and reached their target by the following morning, surprising the commander of the local garrison, General Attabal. However, the beleaguered general gathered his wits very quickly and ordered his men to sail out and meet the Romans at sea before they could establish a blockade. When the Carthaginians sailed out, the Roman fleet was split into 3 squadrons, one inside Drepanum's harbour, one at its entrance, and one still outside. Claudius realized they were too far apart to mount an effective defense, and ordered the forward-facing vessels to hastily row out of the harbour. This was a disastrous decision, as the advanced Roman squadron collided with the other 2. Many of their oars were broken, compromising their speed and mobility.
Ooh. Oh, man.
In the meanwhile, Attabal's fleet rowed out of the harbour and performed a swift outflanking maneuver,
The flank!
pressing the Romans dangerously close to the coastline. Attabal signalled his ships to form a long line, parallel to the coast, and then he gave the order to charge. The Carthaginian ships rammed hard into the Roman prows and broadsides, sinking a great number. Others were captured by the experienced marine soldiers manning the Punic vessels. When Claudius realized that his forces were nearing catastrophe, he managed to extricate only 30 ships, while the others were sunk or seized by Attabal's sailors.
Wow.
The defeat at Drepanum did not shatter Roman resolve. On the contrary, the Senate organized a new fleet of 60 warships and 800 transports carrying supplies to the besiegers at Lilybaeum. The fleet made a stop in Messana, where it was reinforced by 60 more naval vessels, then made a second stop in Syracuse, and
You know, when I was reading the Life of Pyrrhus by Plutarch, the ambassador that Pyrrhus had sent to the Romans made a great observation that I still remember to this day. That observation is the Romans are like a hydra. You kill one army, they'll build like so much more. And it's true, the Romans are just a hydra. You chop off one head and they'll grow like 10 more. Just there's no beating them. There's just no way to beat them. They'll just always come back. This is early Rome, by the way. Later on, the Romans lose their manpower. But, you know, early Rome was a different beast, bro. Just the infinite armies they could spawn.
resumed its route towards Lilybaeum, sailing along Sicily's southern coast. Meanwhile, Attabal, the victor of Drepanum, had dispatched his deputy, Cathallo, and a fleet 100 ships strong in aid of Himilco, commander at Lilybaeum. Cathallo fell upon the Romans anchored at Lilybaeum, setting several ships on fire and capturing others.
Dang.
At the same time, Himilco ordered a
Yeah, the Carthaginians are suddenly doing much better on the naval front, huh? Yeah, I'm noticing that. They're actually kind of doing a little bit better now.
40, causing further disarray amongst the Roman lines. The fight ended quickly as Cartholo towed away his captured vessels and laid anchor south of Lilybaeum. Then, by chance, his sailors sighted another Roman fleet approaching from the east, the relief convoy from Syracuse. But the Romans had taken precautions to send light boats ahead of them as scouts. The scouts sensed the ambush and reported back to their officers, who prepared a counter-ambush. The Roman fleet dropped anchor by the coast, and the soldiers on board disembarked and trained their catapults and ballistae toward the sea. When Cartholo arrived in range, his ships were targeted by a shower of projectiles. The admiral was unable to fight back, but could seize some of the enemy's transport ships and sail eastwards, towards the Cape of Pacinus. Unbeknownst to him, 2 Roman squadrons, just sailing off Syracuse, were heading his way. Luckily for Cartholo, the Romans preferred to avoid combat, for they were wary of closing into a treacherously rocky stretch of the shore. The experienced Carthaginian sailors realized immediately that a storm was brewing, and persuaded their commander to ignore the enemy ships altogether. It was the right decision. As Cartholo headed towards Pacinus, nature did the job for him. A catastrophic storm hit the coastline, wrecking all.
Okay, nature, you get the MVP award for Carthage. You have carried the effort in a way the Carthaginians could have never hoped to.
Roman ships.
Nature wins.
This was the 3rd maritime disaster endured by the Romans during the war, which once again shattered their resolve to attempt operations by sea. However, in the year 248 BC, Consul Lucius Junius was determined to continue fighting on land. He led his forces on foot across Sicily from Syracuse to Lilybaeum to tighten the noose on the Carthaginian stronghold. In need of an easy victory, Junius set his sight on the minor Punic center of Eryx, guarding the road between Panomus and Drepana. The town could be reached only through a narrow and steep mountain road, but the consul was not deterred. In a swift action, his legions made the ascent and took Eryx by storm, conquering a landmark of high symbolic value, the Temple of Aesonean Aphrodite. This minor victory marked the end of the 16th year of the First Punic War, a conflict that severely tested the capabilities of both parties. Rome and Carthage were exhausted, to the brink of collapse, having suffered hundreds of thousands of losses, but neither of them was willing to give in. A new phase of the war was about to begin, one that would see the rise of the first notable member of a bloodline of relentless enemies of Rome, Hamilcar Barca.
Okay, this is the actual Hamilcar. The previous guy I think I mentioned earlier was not him. I apologize, but I want people to know I can be forgiven for that, because how many there's just too many hands in Carthage, guys.
Following Cartholo, Hamilcar's fleet targeted the Italian mainland too, as he first raided the district of Locri and then devastated other locations along the Calabrian coast.
Oh my gosh.
He then changed the theatre of operations again, sailing to Sicily's northwestern coast and seizing Hercte. This town was perched atop a mountain just outside Panomus, in direct view of the Roman garrison. But the mountain was protected by 3 almost vertical cliffsides, which made it virtually impregnable. From Hercte, Hamilcar dominated the roads connecting the Roman strongholds of Panomus and Eryx. Moreover, he had access to a harbour from which he could reach Lilybaeum and Drepana. Finally, he could use the port to launch raids on the Italian coasts, reaching as far north as Cumae in Campania. The Republic, after having suffered a string of naval defeats and maritime disasters in the past years, was not able to oppose him effectively at sea. And on land, all the Panomus garrison was able to do was establish a detached camp a kilometre from Hercte. General Barca, however, did not fall into the trap of an open battle. Instead, his forces slipped past the Roman camp and then harassed the legions around Panomus and beyond, ambushing foraging parties or engaging in rapid skirmishes before returning to base. The Greek historian Polybius described the following years of fighting as a boxing match between 2 contenders of equal strength, skill, and courage, who exchanged their punches, feints, blocks, and quick retreats on a daily basis. After slugging it out for 3 years, Hamilcar decided to attempt a more decisive action. His troops moved out of Hergte and occupied a town close to the Roman hilltop fortress of Eryx. From there, they were able to isolate the legions on its summit and put them under siege for a further 2 years. The struggle resumed as obstinately and fiercely as ever, likened by Polybius to a cockfight in which none of the exhausted roosters was willing to give up.
Yeah, that's kind of what the phase of this war has just devolved to, right? Just a battle of attrition. Now, who's going to give in first? Oh, boy.
Both Rome and Carthage were, in fact, almost completely worn out by more than 20 years of constant war. In the last years, expensive naval warfare had almost dwindled to nothing, while operations on land dragged on as Hamilcar's inferior force kept in check the legions in Sicily. The Romans, however, were willing to make one last titanic leap forward to unlock the stalemate. The Republic's coffers were empty, but several wealthy citizens were happy to contribute to the war effort by privately funding the construction of a new
Oh
fleet.
my god! Just 4 times the charm and just throws in the fleet. This is why Rome, bro. War is a way of life for the Romans. Like, the people are in it. They will go that extra step. Oh boy. Oh my gosh, just these guys are too much for me, the Romans, man.
Fundraising campaign was so successful that Rome was able to launch 200 state-of-the-art quinqueremes.
Oh my gosh.
In 242 BC,
Just can't, they just can't stop winning, the Romans. They just can't stop. Like, these guys just can't quit ever, bro. This is why the Romans became what they became. This is it.
the new fleet was put under the command of consul Gaius Lutatius Catulus, who proceeded to blockade the ports of Lilybaeum and Drepanum. With both cities firmly under siege, he drilled his sailors, oarsmen and marines, all of whom had been picked from among his best legionnaires. Lutatius knew that the only way to put an end to the long war was to inflict a final decisive naval defeat on Carthage. He had laid the bait, and the catch would soon arrive. By 242 BC, the Carthaginians had greatly scaled back their fleet, and appeared unable to pick up the consul's gauntlet. But news of the reborn Roman squadrons greatly impressed Carthage. After having left Hamilcar to his own devices for 4 years, the Carthaginian Senate finally decided to resume shipbuilding and resupply their brilliant general. By 241 BC, a fleet left Carthage loaded with provisions. Command of this newly minted navy was trusted to General Hanno, who formulated a simple plan: evacuate the Roman fleet, drop anchor near Eryx, and resupply Hamilcar's troops. Once his ships were lighter, he planned to take aboard Hamilcar and his best soldiers. Only then did he aim to attack the Roman navy. In preparation for this action, Hanno dropped anchor at the Holy Isle off the coast of Lilybaeum. Unbeknownst to Hanno, Gaius Lutatius was informed of the Carthaginian admiral's arrival and seized the initiative. From his anchorage at Lilybaeum, he boarded his best legionnaires and sailed his squadrons to the island of Igusa, from where he could block Hanno's path. The following morning, the 10th of March 241 BC, the Carthaginian fleet appeared on the horizon, enjoying a strong breeze from the west. Soon, the wind grew into a storm, and the sea turned rough. Lutatius was wary of subjecting his fleet to yet another maritime disaster, but he could not let Hanno slip through. At Lutatius's signal, the Roman oarsmen rowed in unison against the crashing waves, deploying their quinqueremes into a single line, their prows directed squarely at Hanno. Seeing this, the Carthaginians lowered their masts, and their oarsmen too rowed at full power towards the Romans, bracing themselves for contact. Despite their gallant effort, the Carthaginians were, on this occasion, no match for the Romans. Lutatius's ships were faster, more maneuverable, and better manned. The rostra of the Republic ploughed into the sides of the Punic quinqueremes, shattering their oars and piercing their hulls. Many more of Hanno's ships were surrounded and stormed by the Roman marines. In the span of one morning, Hanno lost 50 ships sunk and 70 captured with their crews. Only a sudden wind from the east allowed the survivors to escape back to the Holy Isle.
Yeah, the Romans are just the master of the seas now. Like the people, it's actually really inspirational. The people all like fundraising to keep the war going. That's like the final push that they needed, right? To like finally break the stalemate and to win the war. Like, it really is inspirational. The Roman people like are not done yet. Despite how exhausted they are, it's just like we can keep going. Yeah.
Once again, Rome ruled the waves, and Carthage was unable to support the gallant Hamilcar Barca still stranded on Sicily. All the Carthaginians could do was send a message to the general, giving him the freedom to decide whether to continue the fight or not. Wisely, Barca decided he could not resist much longer, and sent envoys to Lutatius, seeking terms for peace. And the consul was happy to negotiate, as he knew that Rome's resources were nearing collapse. Thus, the longest war known to humanity until that time, at least according to Polybius, had come to an end, after an estimated 1 million lives had been lost to fighting, drowning, disease, and starvation.
Wow. In total, 1 million people died. Dude, that's so crazy. This war was insane, by the way. Just everything that happened. The natural disasters, the battles, just everything. Dang, dude.
The first draft of the peace treaty demanded that the Carthaginians evacuate Sicily and return all Roman prisoners without ransom. They had to pledge not to declare war on Syracuse nor its allies, and they committed to pay 2,200 talents of silver to Rome over 20 years, roughly equivalent to 70 metric tons of the precious metal. The settlement agreed by Lutatius and Hamilcar was revised by the Roman Centuriate Assembly, who made the conditions even harsher. Now, Carthage had to pay 3,200 talents over just 10 years. The woes for Carthage, however, were far from over, as another conflict, a direct consequence of the First Punic War, loomed over the horizon. After the signing of the peace treaty, Hamilcar gave orders to all Carthaginian troops, most of whom were mercenaries, to return to North Africa. In 240 BC, Barca's subordinate, General Gesco, organized the transport piecemeal, shipping mercenaries to Carthage in small detachments. His instructions were for the Senate back home to pay each unit on their arrival and then dismiss them, so as to avoid a large concentration of mercenary troops within the city walls. But the Senate ignored Gesco's advice, knowing that they could afford only a reduced pay to the hired swords, and thought that by entertaining them in Carthage for some days, they could soften the pill.
Yeah, no. Oh my gosh, the Carthaginian Senate guys, I just roll my eyes at them sometimes. Yeah, the mercenary wars. I think Hamilcar is actually a big part of actually helping Carthage survive this.
This was a terrible idea, of course, and the mercenaries launched into a destructive bender. The government convinced the mercenary officers to relocate their troops to the nearby city of Sica, where the lawless spree continued, exacerbated by the delayed pay of wages. After fruitless negotiations with General Hanno, the mercenaries elected leaders, the Libyan Mathos and the Campanian Spendius, and decided to take the matter of payment into their own hands. 20,000 men strong, the rebel army then marched to Tunis and pitched their camp, directly threatening Carthage from the south. Mathos then sent emissaries to
This sucks for Carthage. Imagine they just literally lost this war, have to pay these high war reparations, and now have to deal with a rebellion on their hands. That's the kind of thing with mercenaries, though. They're not always the most loyal, as we've seen a lot of times in history. And yeah, this is a good example of that, you know.
various cities in Libya.
Though it is fair that they are angry at the lack of pay, by the way, but yeah.
Urging them to join in the rebellion against Carthage. The appeal was successful,
Oh
and
my
an additional
gosh.
70,000 men joined the rebel army in Tunis. From there, Mathos dispatched 2 forces, laying siege to Utica and Hippo Zarytus, thus completely isolating the city of Carthage proper. The city rulers prepared to resist and appointed General Hanno as commander-in-chief. He proceeded to hire new, more loyal mercenaries, as well as forming and drilling a citizen militia, which he then led against the rebel encampment outside Utica. His assault was initially successful, as his elephant charge laid waste among the besiegers, dispersing them onto a nearby hill. Emboldened by the success, Hanno and his men grew complacent,
Oh my
relaxing
gosh.
discipline and looting the enemy camp. Meanwhile, the rebels reorganized their ranks and fell upon Hanno's forces,
Oh no.
killing a large part and forcing the rest to retreat. According to Polybius, Hanno again proved his incompetence some days later when he encountered the enemy again in a nearby encampment, but failed to surround and destroy their contingent. The Carthaginian Senate, therefore, relieved Hanno of his command and appointed a more trustworthy general, Hamilcar Barca himself.
That famous Barca bloodline that just, again, the Barcas are just a weird anomaly among the Carthaginians generals because they were actually good. You know what I mean? Oh boy. It's gonna be nice because, as you all know, Hannibal Barca is my favorite military commander. I can see where he got his talent from. I'm really looking forward to seeing his dad in action now.
Hamilcar assembled a new army, numbering 70 elephants and 10,000 mercenaries, militias, and deserters from the rebel camp. Barca had a tough challenge ahead. To move out of Carthage and relieve the siege of Utica, he had to pass the Bagradès River, which could be crossed only through one bridge, which was guarded by 10,000 of Mathos's men. But the crafty general had observed that, in certain weather conditions, a portion of the river tended to silt, thus offering a chance to cross it on foot.
Wow.
When the right moment arrived,
Again, that craftiness, that typical Barca craftiness I'm seeing on display. Coming in clutch once again. This is so cool.
Barca's army marched through the Bagradès at night and the following morning attacked Mathos's forces from the rear. When the rebel co-leader Spendius realized what was happening, he left the camp outside Utica with 15,000 soldiers, marching to the rescue of Mathos. Hamilcar initially marched in parallel to the combined force of 25,000 rebels, with his elephants at the front, followed by the cavalry, the light infantry, and finally the lines of heavy hoplites. Suddenly, his army halted and spun to the right, retreating from the enemy. Sensing victory, Spendius and Mathos launched
This is a trap, right? Barca wants them to do this.
all-out charge on Hamilcar, but it was a trap.
Yes!
The general ordered his hoplites to form a line and face the enemy again. The rebel charge crashed against the wall of shields and spears, suffering heavy casualties.
Oh my gosh.
Then the elephants and cavalry also turned around, smashing into the survivors. 6,000 rebel troops were killed, while 2,000 were taken prisoner in the action. Hamilcar pressed his advantage, taking the encampment on the Bagradès by storm and forcing the few survivors to flee to Tunis.
Genius. Just notice the shift between the other Carthaginian generals we saw and Barca, bro. Like, just the levels are insane. This man is a master of what he's doing. Cunning, crafty, amazing. It's just absolute Barca.
The siege of Utica had been relieved, and Hamilcar's next objective was to liberate the blockade of Hippo Zarytus. However, Mathos and Spendius managed to reorganize their forces, securing support from Numidian allies and 2,000 Gaulish mercenaries under a man named Autaritus.
Oh my gosh, what a disaster. Holy crap. But if anyone can pull it off, it's Hamilcar Barca.
Thus, while marching towards Hippo Zarytus, Hamilcar found himself surrounded by Libyan mercenaries on his front, the Numidians on the rear, and Spendius and Autaritus on his flank. This could have been the end of Hamilcar Barca had he not received the unexpected help of a Numidian leader called Nereves. An admirer of the Carthaginians, and of Hamilcar in particular, the young chieftain switched sides, bringing 2,000 elite cavalrymen to Barca's side. In exchange for his help, the general offered his daughter in marriage to the Numidian. With the deal sealed, Hamilcar lured Spendius and the Gauls and the Libyans into a battle of which there are scant details. We only know that the Carthaginian elephants and the Numidian allies did most of the job, massacring 10,000 of their enemies and capturing 4,000. Meanwhile, another force of mercenaries in Sardinia had decided to take up arms against their Carthaginian masters, executing generals Bastarus and Hanno. The island fell briefly under rebel control, until the local population rose up against them and expelled them. Back in North Africa, Hamilcar suffered another unexpected reversal of fortune, when the cities of Utica and Hippo Zarytus, which he had just liberated, suddenly pledged allegiance to the rebel cause.
Oh my gosh.
With the noose around Carthage tightened once again, all Hamilcar could do was resume his signature guerrilla tactics, harassing the supply lines of Spendius and Mathos with daring cavalry raids. In 238 BC, the scales of fortune tipped once again in Carthage's favour. Rome agreed to release thousands of prisoners from the Punic War, who promptly joined the ranks of Hamilcar. With his forces reinforced, the general was able to scale up his actions. Once again, Polybius does not offer much detail, except that Hamilcar was able to lure enemy contingents into open, flat terrain, in which he had the advantage thanks to the elephants and the Numidian cavalry. This way, Hamilcar defeated in detail the superior enemy forces, to the point that they did not dare leave their main encampment. Barca then proceeded to besiege the camp until the starved rebels were forced to acts of cannibalism. Eventually, Spendius, Autatius, and 8 other rebel officers accepted an invitation from Hamilcar to parley. The sly general took them hostage, betting that the leaderless rebels would soon commit a foolish act, and they did. The mutinied mercenaries sallied out of their camp in a disorderly fashion, seeking to retrieve their leaders. The Carthaginians then swooped in, surrounded them, and massacred 40,000 of their enemies. The last
Dude, he's owning them. Holy crap. It is so cool to see this, because Oversimplified touched on it, but obviously didn't go into depth, but I'm happy to see, like, Hannibal's dad in action, because he's amazing too. Imagine Hannibal's dad had been around during the Second Punic War. Like, he's probably the tag team partner that Hannibal could have needed, because my goodness. Like, the two Barcas together would have been a nightmare.
center of rebel resistance was Tunis, which Hamilcar surrounded with 2 armies. He personally led the southern contingent, while the northern siege lines were under the command of one general, Hannibal. No, still not that Hannibal.
Yeah, I know. At this point, I'm just like, Hannibal, Hanno... I don't know, bro. There's too many. There's too many in this one series. They all, other than Barca, they all kind of just bleed together in my head, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Hannibal tried to shock the enemy by taking the now captive Spendius and other prisoners within sight of the besiegers, and then had them tortured, crucified, and slain. Mathos, observing from behind the walls, ordered a sortie, which successfully destroyed Hannibal's camp. The defeated general was captured and crucified on the same cross that had held Spendius.
Good plan, Hannibal. You shocked them and got yourself killed. Oh boy.
Once Mathos had enacted his revenge, Hamilcar broke his camp and decided to relocate next to the mouth of the river Bagrides. At this stage, the Carthaginian Senate took inspiration from their Roman counterpart and decided to stage a final effort of willpower to bring the conflict to a close. 30 senators and General Hanno rallied as many citizens as they could into a new militia and joined forces with Hamilcar. After yet another campaign of low-intensity skirmishes, Hamilcar and Mathos agreed to settle scores in a pitched battle. The details are not known, except that it was a complete defeat for the rebels. Most of the Libyan mercenaries perished in the field, while the rest, including Mathos, were taken prisoner. With the swift recapture of Utica and Hippo Zarytus, the mercenary war was over, thanks primarily to the skill and genius of Hamilcar Barca.
Again, dude helped save Carthage. Without him, I honestly could have seen Carthage fall right then and there. Like, again, typical Barca W, dare I say.
But the Carthaginian economy had been utterly drained by the decades of war,
Yep.
first against Rome, then against the rebels. And the Punic coffers were about to suffer another hit. Shortly before being expelled from Sardinia, the rebel mercenaries summoned Rome for help, and the Republic did intervene.
Oh no.
Too late to help the rebels, but not too late to occupy the island.
Oh my god.
Caused outrage in Carthage, and its leaders demanded that the Romans evacuate Sardinia. Rome's response was to threaten another war, lest Carthage paid yet another tribute of 1,200.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that goes to show you where the Romans are at. Wow. Real jerk move. But that's I expect that from the Romans, holy crap. Yeah, Carthage, bro.
100 talents. The browbeaten Carthaginians could do nothing but comply. A faction within the Carthaginian Senate was inclined to blame Hamilcar for all their recent woes, especially the mercenary war.
Oh my gosh.
The undefeated general, however, enjoyed great popularity, and his own faction gradually acquired power on the political stage.
Heck yeah.
Hamilcar was now free to set his own long-term plan, prepare Carthage for a future war against Rome, which he saw as inevitable. To achieve that, he had to secure the repayment of war indemnities to the Romans to prevent them from interfering in Carthaginian affairs. And to pay back the Republic, Hamilcar needed large deposits of silver and gold, which could be found in the Iberian Peninsula. Thus, in 238 BC, Hamilcar travelled to Spain in preparation for a long and successful campaign of conquest. Before embarking on the adventure, he performed ritual sacrifices to Baal and invited his 9-year-old son.
Yep, the famous oath where he tells his son Hannibal to always be an enemy of Rome. Talk about the perfect origin story for an anti-Roman, side, like, always be an enemy of Rome. He literally instilled his hatred on Rome onto Hannibal. And Hannibal would go on to give Rome their biggest L's. Some of their biggest L's. Like, can I say no more? But amazing.
To participate. As the boy expressed his desire to join in the Spanish expedition, Hamilcar asked him to lay his right hand on the altar and swear that he would never be friends with Rome. The boy's name was of course Hannibal Barca, and the keeping of his oath would bring the Roman Republic to the brink of destruction. All episodes of our series on the Second Punic War are now available for our members and patrons.
And so that's the end of the video. Boy, I'm tired. Oh boy, I've been recording all day. I'm gonna call quits here, but overall that was awesome. It was awesome to see that. I could see why the Punic Wars are just some of the biggest battles, biggest wars of antiquity. They really did shape the world as we would know it, right? Especially here in the West. And overall, just that was awesome. I really enjoyed that.